Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something that, well, it affects every single one of us. What we eat.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're going to plunge into the often confusing world of dietary advice and uncover some truly surprising, maybe even bizarre origins of the beliefs we hold about fat, carbs, and, healthy eating.
It's completely understandable why people feel so lost. I mean, the nutritional recommendations seem to change all the time, right? Back and forth.
Exactly. So our goal today is to try and cut through some of that confusion.
We want to look at the foundational stories, those pivotal moments in history that have really shaped how we think about food.
And for this deep dive, our main source is the documentary FAT, a documentary from Gravitas Documentaries.
It's a fascinating watch.
Okay, let's kick things off with a story from the documentary that really hit me. It's about a young boy named Charlie, born in 1992.
Right, Charlie's story.
He had a perfectly normal first year, but then just before his first birthday, his parents started noticing these, strange little twitches.
And unfortunately, those escalated pretty quickly, didn't they?
Sadly, yes. Into severe epilepsy, the kind where he was having relentless seizures, just constant, even under the care of top pediatric neurologists.
Which, as you can imagine, is just devastating for parents. They were desperate, trying everything, all the standard medications.
Even, I think, invasive brain surgery.
Yeah, exactly. And nothing worked. They were essentially told there was no hope left. It's the absolute worst situation for any parent.
It really is. And here's where it gets really interesting. Almost unbelievable, actually.
The library story.
Yes. Out of sheer desperation, Charlie's father goes to a medical library, starts digging into research on pediatric epilepsy himself.
Just doing his own homework because the experts weren't helping.
Right. And when he discovers is, frankly, shocking. He finds information about the ketogenic diet.
Which is incredibly high in fat and very, very low in carbohydrates.
And the research he found suggested it could significantly help children with severe epilepsy, even cases as bad as Charlie's.
Now, what's fascinating here, and honestly deeply concerning, is the parents' reaction when they found this out.
Utter shock.
Complete shock and frustration. They had taken Charlie to numerous specialists, the best doctors, renowned hospitals.
And not one single person had ever mentioned this dietary option.
Not one. Think about that for a moment. A potential treatment with, promising results for some children was never even brought up.
It immediately makes you wonder, what else? What other established ideas in health might be built on, less than solid ground?
Which perfectly leads us into some of those very established ideas, those nutritional myths the documentary tackles head on.
Things we've all heard countless times like,
grains are good for you, fat is bad for you.
Or the really oversimplified, obesity is just about calories in, calories out, energy balance, they call it.
Yeah, that one's persistent. And the big one, saturated fat directly causes heart disease.
These are beliefs that have become so ingrained in our thinking, haven't they?
Oh, absolutely. They've influenced public health advice for decades, but the documentary starts peeling back the layers.
And reveals some truly surprising historical origins. Where did some of this stuff even start?
Well, let's go way back, like the 1860s, Ellen White and the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Okay, Ellen White. She was a really influential figure in the church, right? Experiences were described as divine revelations.
That's the account, yes. And one night, she reportedly had a vision. God told her, apparently, that people shouldn't eat anything with a face.
Anything with a face, so no animals.
Basically, yes. And this is often cited as, the very beginnings of modern veganism. Before this, while vegetarianism existed in some religious groups, the complete avoidance of all animal products was much less common.
So it seems like the foundations of some modern dietary ideas weren't necessarily based on scientific evidence back then.
But maybe more on personal interpretations or spiritual beliefs?
That's a pretty significant insight right off the bat.
And it gets a little stranger, doesn't it?
The coffee and tea thing.
Yeah.
Apparently, God also told her that coffee and tea were bad.
Which, as the documentary points out, with a bit of head-scratching.
Makes absolutely no logical sense. They come from plants.
Exactly. It really highlights how some early dietary recommendations maybe weren't based on scientific reasoning at all.
It raises that big question about the power of individual beliefs shaping our understanding of diet.
For sure. Now, fast forward a few decades, early 1900s. The story of Vilhjalmur Stefansson.
The explorer who lived with the Inuit in Canada.
Right. And initially he thought, like many people, that a diet full of vegetables was crucial for good health.
But living with the Inuit, he kind of had to eat their diet, right? Which was mainly meat and fish.
Almost entirely. There were hardly any plants available for a good chunk of the year.
And what did he find?
It was astonishing to him. For 4.5 months, he ate nothing but fish and water.
Nothing else.
Nothing else. And he said he felt healthier than ever.
Wow. Stefansson's experience really forces you to question that rigid dietary dogma, doesn't it? Here's someone thriving on a diet completely opposite to the prevailing wisdom.
It really highlights how observation, even without, rigorous scientific explanation at the time, can hold valuable information.
And the Inuit themselves, on this super high-fat, almost zero-carb diet for much of the year.
They seemed perfectly healthy. Stefansson, who had some basic medical knowledge, saw no signs of the common Western diseases, cancer, heart disease.
But when he came back to the U.S. and told people about this,
Met with total disbelief, skepticism everywhere.
yeah, the common idea was no vegetables, all that meat and fat. That can't be healthy. It'll probably kill you.
It just shows the strong biases back then, how hard it is to challenge established norms, even with direct observation.
So we see these sort of personal or religious beliefs shaping early ideas, but then real-world experiences challenging them.
Exactly. Now, the documentary also connects Ellen White's teachings back to someone else famous, John Kellogg.
Ah, yes,
Yeah.
Dr. Kellogg. Cornflakes.
The very same. Apparently, he was heavily influenced by those Seventh-day Adventist beliefs, particularly the idea that avoiding meat would curb sexual desire.
Right, because the thinking was that meat increased libido, which was considered sinful. So to fight these sins of the flesh,
Eating meat was discouraged, and this is where cornflakes come in.
they were created by Kellogg, a Seventh-day Adventist, as this really bland food meant to reduce those urges.
That was the initial intention, but what's nutritionally interesting is that Kellogg also developed a process called dextrinization.
Dextrinization, what's that?
It's where grains were cooked down so much that their starches broke down into simpler sugars, essentially turning them into dextrose.
Dextrose, which is basically just glucose, right? Sugar.
Pretty much, and it's pretty ironic when you think that today dextrose is something we often try to avoid.
Yeah, it's in all sorts of processed foods. Even some meats, the documentary points out, to help with shelf life and curing.
So this food meant to be pure and anti-desire ended up being a source of processed sugar.
It's almost comical, in a way. Those bland flakes, meant to dampen one kind of appetite, ended up contributing to the craving for sugar.
It really shows how original intentions can have these totally unintended, sometimes opposite outcomes.
Okay, so let's shift to the big one. The fat is bad idea. That became so powerful.
Hugely powerful. And the documentary points out that the notion that saturated fat is the main cause of heart disease largely came from observational studies, epidemiology.
Can you explain that a bit more? What's the difference between that kind of study and, say, an experiment?
Sure. Observational studies look for patterns in large groups of people. They can show correlations, meaning two things tend to happen together.
Like they noticed populations eating more saturated fat also tended to have more heart disease.
Exactly. But the key thing is correlation doesn't prove causation. These studies couldn't definitively prove that saturated fat caused the heart disease.
Right. It's like the classic example. Ice cream sales go up in summer, and so do sunburns. Doesn't mean ice cream causes sunburn.
Precisely. There could be other factors involved confounding variables. To prove causation, you generally need controlled experiments where you change one specific factor and observe the direct effect.
And the documentary stresses that actual experimental evidence directly proving saturated fat clogs arteries and causes heart attacks, well, it's never really been established.
That's the claim, and it's quite remarkable given how dominant the idea became. There's an absence of that direct experimental proof.
The documentary even mentions a college professor who gave completely opposite information about fat and sugar as energy sources, just weeks apart.
Yeah, it highlights the confusion that existed even within the academic world back then.
And because these observational studies couldn't definitively prove causation, it left the door open for other things to influence public perception, right? Like major events.
Absolutely. And media attention, which brings us to President Eisenhower's heart attack.
Right, 1955, that was a huge deal. Suddenly, heart disease wasn't just some abstract thing. It was front-page news.
If the president could have a heart attack, anyone could. It created this real sense of national urgency, a strong desire to figure out what caused heart attacks and how to prevent them.
And the media played a massive role in shaping what people believed about it.
Huge impact, which ties into another interesting story from the documentary about media influence, Vinnie Tortorich.
Oh, the Oprah story. That was wild. He's a fitness expert invited onto Oprah's show in '93.
Under completely false pretenses. Told he'd be pretending to date an older woman for a segment on women living their dreams.
And the point wasn't really the story itself, but what he realized from it.
Exactly. What's revealing is how easily a narrative, even a totally made-up one, can be presented to a massive audience and just taken as truth.
Despite him being uncomfortable, the whole thing being fake, it became one of her highest-rated episodes.
And he realized the immense power of media to shape perceptions, even if they're not based on facts at all.
Which really sets the stage for the rise of a very influential figure in this whole diet story, Ancel Keys.
Ancel Keys, a pathologist at the University of Minnesota. In the 1950s, he put forward his diet heart hypothesis.
The idea that saturated fat and cholesterol were the main culprits in heart disease. And he's famous for his 7-country study.
Right. Now, this study is examined pretty critically in the documentary. What were some of the main issues raised?
Well, the big criticism is that Keys is accused of essentially cherry-picking his data.
Meaning?
He apparently looked at data from 22 countries, but only presented results from the 7 that seemed to support his hypothesis, the one showing a link between higher fat intake and more heart disease.
And the other 15 countries.
When you look at the data from all 22, the picture becomes much less clear. Lots of countries didn't fit his neat pattern. Countries with high fat intake but low heart disease, or low fat intake but high heart disease.
So the claim is he basically picked the evidence that backed up his theory and ignored the evidence that didn't.
That's the accusation, yeah. And it's a pretty significant one.
Despite these criticisms, though, the 7-country study made Keys incredibly prominent, and it led to a major turning point in dietary advice.
The American Heart Association recommendation in 1961.
Exactly. Heavily influenced by Keys' work, the AHA recommended that all Americans should limit their intake of saturated fat and cholesterol to prevent heart disease.
And that recommendation became the foundation for so much of the dietary advice we've all received for, 60 years?
Pretty much. And yet, the documentary points out that even now, there isn't high-level, credible experimental evidence that definitively links saturated fat itself to heart disease.
It's honestly shocking when you step back and think about how dominant that idea has been for so long without that solid proof.
It's a truly startling statement, isn't it? But while Keys was laser-focused on fat,
there was someone else looking at a different potential culprit.
Yes, sugar. This was John Yudkin, a British scientist in the mid-1960s.
Okay, Yudkin. What was his theory?
Yudkin proposed that sugar, not fat, was the primary driver of the metabolic problems associated with heart disease.
So he was saying it's the sweet stuff, not the fatty stuff, that's the real problem.
Essentially, yes. He did research showing that feeding sugar to animals, and humans too, could cause various health issues, things like high triglycerides, insulin resistance that seemed related to heart disease.
He argued that eating lots of sugary, high-carb foods raises your blood sugar, spikes your insulin, the fat-storing hormone leading to weight gain and other metabolic issues.
That was his line of reasoning, but he ran into Ancel Keys.
Wow. And Keys, who had much more influence by then,
actively worked to discredit Yudkin and his sugar theory. The documentary portrays Keys as a very strong personality, not afraid to use his influence.
He dismissed Yudkin's work quite harshly, didn't he? Called it a mountain of nonsense or
something like that, yes. He published a very critical rebuttal, effectively pushing Yudkin's ideas to the margins of the scientific community.
So, because Keys's fat hypothesis had gained so much traction, and research funding followed that,
Yudkin's sugar theory really struggled to get accepted, even though some of his findings were quite compelling.
It really highlights how scientific consensus can be swayed not just by evidence, but also by personalities, influence, and maybe just the prevailing beliefs of the time.
Absolutely. Which brings us to the 1970s and the McGovern Committee.
Right. Now, initially, this committee, starting in 1969, was focused on a really important issue: hunger and malnutrition in America.
Yeah, there was growing public awareness then about poverty and hunger in the U.S., fueled by reports, tours of impoverished areas. Senator George McGovern spearheaded it.
A really important goal, addressing food insecurity.
Definitely. But then in 1974, the committee's focus shifted quite dramatically.
From not enough food to too much of the wrong food.
Essentially, yes, to address overnutrition. And in 1977, they released dietary goals for all Americans.
And what was the main message?
Heavily emphasizing reducing fat intake, especially saturated fat, and also cholesterol, still very much influenced by that prevailing focus stemming from Keys's work.
And the documentary suggests that an unintended consequence of telling people to eat less fat was?
Well, people have to eat something. As they reduced fat, they may have inadvertently increased their consumption of processed foods and, importantly, carbohydrates.
Which then leads us straight into the 1980s and the absolute boom of low-fat food products. Remember Snackwells?
Oh, yeah. Everywhere. The thinking was, fat is bad, so low fat must be good.
That was the logic. But what's striking, and the documentary highlights this, is that this whole era of low-fat diets coincided with the significant increase in the rates of obesity and diabetes.
Yeah, the graphs showing those trends starting around then are pretty stark. The documentary suggests a possible connection, even if it doesn't definitively prove causation from just that correlation.
We also saw sugar consumption go up around then, didn't we? Maybe linked to high fructose corn syrup becoming more common.
Potentially, yeah. Partly due to government policies affecting sugar and corn prices.
And then, in 1992, we got the icon of that era, the food pyramid.
The original USDA food pyramid. And what was at the base? The foundation.
Bread, cereal, rice, pasta, carbohydrates. A massive recommendation. 6 to 11 servings a day.
6 to 11 servings. While fat was way up at the tiny peak, lose sparingly.
And it's worth pointing out, as the documentary does, that the serving sizes on the pyramid were often much smaller than what people actually ate or what was listed on food labels. More confusion.
Right, so you had this official advice pushing high carbs, low fat. And since the 1970s, alongside these dietary shifts, we've seen this significant rise in conditions like
Metabolic syndrome.
type 2 diabetes, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, sleep apnea.
Things that were apparently much less common before the widespread adoption of these low-fat, high-carb diets. Now, metabolic syndrome, just to clarify for listeners, that's like a cluster of things, right?
Exactly. High blood pressure, high blood sugar, unhealthy cholesterol levels, excess fat around the waist, altogether.
Okay. So this brings us back full circle almost to the ketogenic diet, the diet that so dramatically helped young Charlie.
Right. The documentary revisits his story, how this very high-fat, very low-carb diet completely stopped his seizures after everything else failed.
It's such a powerful example, a different dietary approach having these profound health benefits, and it really hammers home the frustration.
Why wasn't this offered earlier? Why did his parents have to stumble upon this life-changing information themselves after seeing so many specialists?
It really makes you wonder how many other potentially helpful treatments or approaches are out there, just not being widely considered or offered.
And it's important here, I think, to make that clear distinction the film mentions
between nutritional ketosis and ketoacidosis.
Exactly. Nutritional ketosis is a controlled, safe metabolic state you achieve through diet. Ketoacidosis is a dangerous condition, usually linked to uncontrolled type 1 diabetes. Totally different things.
It's a good point. The documentary also shares the experience of Dr. Eric Westman,
who had remarkable success reversing diabetes in a university study using a very low-carb diet.
But the reaction from the wider nutrition science community was underwhelming.
The surprising lack of widespread curiosity is how it's put. Like, oh, that's interesting, but not a huge rush to explore it further.
We also hear from the Mackenzie family. Their son has type 1 diabetes.
And against the standard advice they received, they found that a low-carb diet helped manage his condition much, much better.
Significantly reducing his need for insulin.
Yeah.
But they faced a lot of pushback, right?
Oh, yeah. Resistance and skepticism from parts of the medical community for choosing that approach, even though it was working for their son.
And what's really concerning is that statistic mentioned, that only a tiny percentage of epilepsy patients who could potentially benefit from the ketogenic diet are actually using it today.
It's shockingly low. And the film suggests a major reason is the lack of in-depth nutritional training in medical schools. Diet just isn't always seen as a primary therapeutic tool.
Which seems crazy when you think about it. And then there's the story of Dr. Gary Fettke in Australia,
who faced official warnings, basically got in trouble just for advising his orthopedic patients, many with diabetes, to reduce their sugar intake.
It's almost unbelievable, suggesting less sugar was treated like some kind of rogue, dangerous advice.
It really illustrates the strong resistance to challenging that conventional dietary advice within the medical establishment.
This resistance then leads us into talking about research that maybe got overlooked or even suppressed, and potential conflicts of interest.
Right. The documentary discusses the Minnesota Coronary Survey. This was a large, well-controlled study from the late 60s, early 70s.
What did it look at?
It tested replacing saturated fat with vegetable oil, high in linoleic acid, to see if it reduced heart disease risk.
And what did it find?
It found no benefit. No reduction in cardiovascular disease or overall mortality from swapping out saturated fat for that type of vegetable oil. In fact, there was a hint of potential harm in some groups.
Okay, so results that contradicted the prevailing hypothesis.
Exactly. And the kicker, the full results weren't published for 16 years.
16 years. Why on earth?
According to one of the lead researchers quoted, they were simply disappointed in the results. They didn't show what they expected or perhaps hoped to find.
Wow, that's concerning.
It raises questions. And the documentary suggests various factors might contribute to the lack of promotion or even suppression of alternative dietary approaches.
Like what?
Well, potential financial interests, the pharmaceutical industry, medical device makers who treat diseases potentially linked to diet, the sugar industry defending its product.
And maybe just the deeply held beliefs within the cardiology community. It's hard to admit you might have been wrong for decades.
That's a huge factor, too. It's a really complex web of different influences, isn't it?
Definitely. Now, you also have the counter-argument that sometimes gets raised, particularly about keto for kids with epilepsy. The idea it might cause cognitive issues.
Yes, that's a valid concern raised by some, and the documentary does acknowledge it. But it also emphasizes the often dramatic reduction or even complete elimination of debilitating seizures these children experience on the diet.
So it becomes a balance, right?
Yeah.
Weighing potential benefits against potential risks.
Which really should be discussed openly and honestly with patients and their families, allowing for informed choices.
And the update on Charlie the boy, whose story started this, he's now a thriving elementary school teacher. That's a pretty powerful testament to the positive outcome in his case.
Absolutely. And then there are the personal experiments by Dave Feldman.
Showing that really counterintuitive thing with LDL cholesterol on a low-carb, high-fat diet.
Yeah, finding that for him and others he observed, eating more saturated fat sometimes seemed to lower his LDL cholesterol, while eating less fat made it go up, completely challenging the standard lipid hypothesis for people adapted to that way of eating.
These findings just add another layer of complexity, questioning the established understanding.
They really do. And the documentary wraps up by talking about just how hard it is, psychologically and institutionally, to admit that long-held beliefs about diet might be wrong.
Especially when those beliefs have shaped public health policy and recommendations for decades. There are careers, reputations, entire industries built on these ideas.
Huge barriers to acknowledging potential errors on such a large scale.
So after diving into all this history, the conflicting studies, the personal stories, what does it all mean for us? For you, the listener, trying to figure out what to actually eat?
Well, I think it really highlights, first and foremost, the sheer complexity of nutrition science and how many different forces, not just science, have shaped our current understanding.
Yeah, it's not just about biology. It's history, personal beliefs, media narratives, powerful figures, economic interests.
Exactly. What we believe about food has these deep roots. So it's a really strong reminder, I think, to approach any dietary information you get with a critical eye.
Always consider the source.
Yeah.
And any potential biases.
Definitely. Don't just accept recommendations at face value. Ask yourself why. Why is this being recommended? What's the evidence, really?
This deep dive gives you so much to think about. It leaves me wondering, given everything we've discussed, the questions around the original research, the unintended consequences, is it maybe time for a fundamental reevaluation of our national dietary guidelines?
And the long-standing advice on fat and carbohydrates.
Yeah. What would it actually take for established institutions to be willing to seriously reconsider their positions?
That's a really important question, and maybe the provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over.
We definitely encourage you to delve deeper if this has sparked your interest.
Yeah, research the ketogenic diet further, explore the history of dietary guidelines in more detail, look into the work of scientists like Yudkin, Fetke, Westman, Feldman, people who have challenged the conventional wisdom.
Ultimately, though, while understanding the history and the science is absolutely vital,
it also comes down to personal responsibility, doesn't it? Taking charge of your own health choices, maybe experimenting safely and in an informed way, of course.
and really paying attention to how your own body responds to different foods, because we're not all the same.
Exactly. Listen to your body. It often holds the key.